WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. It's Tuesday, each and every Tuesday at 2:30. We Should Know comes to you on WCLN Radio, simulcast with Star Communications, Channel 16 each and every Tuesday. There's a replay at 7 p.m. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and a summation in the Thompson weekly newspaper. Thank you for your comments and your continued advice and direction as to who we should have and what you want to know more about. One of those subjects we're going to talk about today, huge subject, not only in North Carolina, but in the United States, the whole issue of handguns, the whole issue of carry and conceal. We have with us Chad Thompson. Chad's with the North Carolina Justice Academy. Chad, we think a lot of the Academy in Thompson County, and I'm sure surrounding counties. I have said this to Mark Strickland before. It is probably one of our biggest and best industries, especially for Salemburg and Thompson County. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to kind of start out a little bit to let folks know a bit about your background. And of course, you graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice from Trinity University. You've also had extensive work in law enforcement for what I call medium to small departments throughout eastern North Carolina.
Agreed.
You've had experience with the Coast Guard. You have had international experience in Kosovo. You have had extremely, experience in not only teaching, but reached the expert levels in firearms and firearms instructor related courses for law enforcement and specialty courses in law enforcement, to include sniper and various other trainings in law enforcement. We'll talk about some of those later. But I want to kind of set the stage for where I hope we can go today, and that's to talk a bit about when we use the words today and we say firearms, typically that's a piece of what is referred to as the whole deadly force spectrum. You know, there's brass knuckles, there's knives, there's all kinds of things people can kill you with. The public as a whole now hear the Constitution of the United States and the whole idea that we have a right to bear arms, and that is true on a federal level. But let's talk about it for you as a trainer, because you train in various capacities. One of those is you teach people in the public something called carry and conceal. Is there a lot of interest in that now in the public, people wanting to have a firearm and to want to have that firearm on their person?
Absolutely. It is, to me, astounding the increase in the numbers that we're seeing in the last few years in people that are interested in obtaining concealed carry.
Those concealed carry permits that we talk about, when you as an instructor, and I'm going to kind of divide Chad Thompson into two capacities here. You, the instructor for the general population, for the citizens, because that's a carry concealed, and then you in your expertise, which is a far deeper stroke with law enforcement, because you do teach advanced courses, advanced tactical courses, all of those kinds of things that sometimes people only see on TV. There's people in the background teaching that, and you're one of those. So when you're doing the law enforcement kind of thing, let's talk about how you got into that. Particularly, and then I want to dig a little bit into your background, how you ended up where you are, but what kind of got you involved in doing the civilian piece of teaching carry and conceal?
When the concealed carry referendum was passed here in 1995, I was interested in it then, and I remain interested in it today, and I decided that one of the best services I could pay my fellow man, my fellow citizen, was to teach them the correct law, the correct marksmanship fundamentals, everything they needed to know to stay out of trouble and to safely carry a concealed handgun. You know, I've always been part of the gun culture, I guess I should say, and I've always believed in our Second Amendment right. And as soon as it became law in '95, I knew I wanted to teach it in North Carolina. I got certified to teach it, and I've never looked back.
Folks need to understand too, and I want you to kind of explain this a bit, that there's an arduous process when we talk about carry and concealed. It's not something that the Attorney General nor the state of North Carolina statutorily or enforcement-wise takes lightly. When you have a person in your class, there's a huge responsibility on you and a huge expectation on that person in your civilian classes.
Absolutely. The system In North Carolina, they got it as close to being right as they could initially. And a lot of states, in my opinion, a lot of states didn't do that initially. Now, nothing's perfect, and it wasn't a panacea, but our legislature has also taken steps since '95 to make it even better than they did initially. But when it became law initially in North Carolina, it was done pretty much right. Other states, comparatively speaking, just didn't do it as well as North Carolina did. Nobody in our state can just walk up and say, I want to obtain a concealed carry permit and get that permit. There are a lot of hoops they got to jump through, a lot of steps they got to take to obtain it.
And I want to let folks know going in our discussion today that we're going to kind of get into some of those details a bit as we do that. I want to kind of back up also a bit and talk about your background, because you, again, as I said a while ago, you had an extensive background as a law enforcement officer here in Eastern North Carolina. You've seen a lot of issues and faced a lot of issues as an officer, both in that capacity as well as a federal law enforcement officer. I call it, in my opinion, a federal law enforcement officer when I look at the Coast Guard, because in essence that's a lot of what the Coast Guard does, is enforcement stuff.
Yes, it is.
So when you look at that and the interdiction issues that you have worked with narcotics and narcotic trafficking and those kinds of things, how big is the gun issue on the dark side, should I say, the other side of the fence that oftentimes taints the ability for a legal person to carry a gun? How big is an issue when you see it?
In my opinion, it's a huge issue, and I think that's why a lot of people that are not educated about the issue look at concealed carry or look at firearms in general as if they're a bad thing, because they always associate, or almost always associate, a firearm with something that somebody has done illegally, specifically the narcotics trade. There's such a higher number of violent incidents statistically associated with narcotics and with firearms with narcotics than any other crime out there.
And there's also, according to ATF, a lot of the issues they're facing now is trafficking in guns as well. I mean, the amount of money that I'll use the word, the dark side market is extremely financially beneficial if a person is willing to take that risk, and it goes right along with the narcotics.
Agreed, completely agreed. I would venture a guess, I don't have the statistics to back that up, but probably second only to the narcotics trade would be gun trafficking now.
Let's kind of get into some of the more meatier parts of what the gun law is in North Carolina. According to Ernie Lee, has been on our district attorney here in the 4th Judicial District, we refer to it as the Castle Doctrine. It basically is built around that concept that you have a right to protect yourself, except in North Carolina, my understanding is you now also have that right if you are standing beside of your car or you getting out of your car. You have a right to protect yourself. But there's so many qualifiers to what that means. Talk about that as if you were talking to your civilian class.
Fundamentally, what students and what citizens need to understand is there are two different sets of laws in North Carolina. There is statutory law and we have common law. Now, statutory law is simply made when the legislature gets together and votes. If they get enough votes, it becomes a law. It is always preceded with a GS, general statute, and then a series of numbers. But that's not the only set of laws we have in North Carolina. We're also a common law state. And I tell people tongue-in-cheek, two things in your life that you never want to watch being made. One is law, the other is sausage. You'll probably lose your appetite for both of them. Common law is, you won't find it written down in a statute book somewhere. Ordinarily, it is carried over from the United Kingdom, England at the time. A judge generations ago agreed that this should be the law. Another judge agreed generations later it should be the law, and it's now known as common sense law or case law. In North Carolina, that castle doctrine you're talking about is usually associated with a dwelling of some sort. Now, it is not limited to your home anymore as it was before. This castle doctrine, General Statute 1451.2 now says, any dwelling. It can be a permanent or temporary dwelling. It can be your home, your friend's home. It can be a recreational vehicle. It can be a tent in a campground, a hotel or motel room, any temporary or permanent dwelling. The state of North Carolina now assumes this: if any person attempts to unlawfully and forcibly enter that dwelling and someone is present, not the person who lives there, not the person who rented the place, but someone is there who has the legal right to be there, they are presumed to hold a reasonable fear of death, great bodily harm, or sexual assault. What that doesn't mean to anyone out there is that if anyone tries to enter that anytime, they are authorized to use deadly force. That's not what it means. It does mean that our state says we assume already that you hold that reasonable fear of death, serious harm, or sexual assault. The difference between that and our common law understanding of deadly force out in public is that that is common law understanding, and there are 4 elements of there that have to be met. Those, like standing beside your vehicle in a parking lot, I would have to go right back to the common law 4 elements, and there are 2 yeses and 2 nos that would have to be met as well.
I think you hit it perfectly on that statute, and when I look at it, and I look at what folks want to understand is, am I okay to do this? Do I have to take a certain amount of punishment if I am armed? And that's the big question. And the driving force, I think, why you're seeing so many people, calling you saying, look, when's the next class? What are we doing? In your opinion, are we seeing a more violent society? And from what I can tell, statistics somewhat show this. But in your opinion, from what you're seeing, are we experiencing a more violent society? By that, I just simply mean, are folks more prone to be violent?
I think without question that we're living in a more violent society, and there are more people on earth and in North Carolina and in the United States than there ever were before. The numbers have risen exponentially, and the number of violent people has risen exponentially.
Growing in North Carolina is obviously a concern with every state, and part of that is the inclusivity. The other part is that folks are, as used to, we were aware of who our neighbors were. We were aware of people. I had a high school coach tell me he could go walk down the hall years ago, and he could look at students and tell you not only who they were, but their parents, their grandparents, where they lived. And he said, quite frankly, I retired because I got to the point I had no idea who all these people are. Plus, we have folks, armed officers in schools now. What does that say for our society?
We have become more transient, I think, not just in North Carolina, but nationwide. Maybe internationally, we've become more transient. It's not like it was even when I was a child. I don't know at what point, and this is just my humble opinion, that we got to the point that we had to have armed officers in the schools, and they had to respond to the threat of lethal force on a constant basis like we do today.
We're going to be back in a moment. We're talking with Chad Thompson, the instructor coordinator over at the Academy. Stay with us. Call a friend. We'll be back in 1 moment.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know's on air. I want to thank you for being with us today. Tuesday, 2:30, each and every Tuesday. Of course, as we mentioned in the show coming on, I want to thank Nicole for her introduction. And we are simulcast. Star Communications, Channel 16. In about 3 or 4 counties, she picks up on TV, and of course, radio WCLN 1170, oldies1170.com out of Clinton. We're talking with Chad Thompson. Chad, instructor coordinator with the Justice Academy. You teach, I guess one could say, you can correct me on this, but some of the most vital life or death courses that's taught at the Justice Academy. And the Justice Academy, at least in my humble opinion, is one of the premier law enforcement justice training facilities in the country. I've seen and taught in some other places, as you know, and I will hold it up beside any of them. So congratulations on being there. As we look at this firearms issue, and it is a deadly force issue, because if you put a piece of lead with it, and you could probably tell me the velocity of that piece of lead into somebody's body, there's a huge likelihood they're going to die. So when folks are being taught this, you have, and I'm sure in your lesson plans, because probably I've seen some of them, you've got something called a continuum of force. The expectation that a law enforcement officer has. I want to speak to the law enforcement officer side, because I want folks to understand what law enforcement officers face with carrying concealed. This is a huge, huge issue for law enforcement people. Folks carrying concealed, if they are in the presence of or they're confronted by a law enforcement officer, what do they need to do if they are carrying a handgun and if they have that handgun on their person?
First of all, when they took their classroom, the training in the classroom they were supposed to take in that 8-hour course at least, and then their firearms qualification, the instructor who taught them should have made sure they understood what to do in the presence of a law enforcement officer. If they didn't, and for the edification of your viewers and listeners, the first thing they need to understand is if they are having a conversation with that officer that is based upon the performance of their official duties, just the general conversation won't cut it. If they're standing there having a conversation about what a beautiful day it is, as it is today, they are not required to do anything. But if that officer addresses them in relation to the performance of their official duties at the earliest feasible opportunity or upon approach by the officer, they're required to let them know two things: that they're a concealed carry permittee and that they're carrying the handgun. Now, what I recommend to people is do not blurt out that you're carrying the handgun. The first thing to let them know is, I am a concealed carry permittee. Most people who do this right, as law enforcement professionals, we don't have to be concerned with them. But if someone just blurts out, I've got a gun on me, and then they follow up with, and I have a concealed carry permit, a lot of times the officer's not going to focus on that second statement. The first thing they hear is gun, and they respond accordingly.
Exactly, and that's exactly where I wanted to go with this, because I think a lot of folks don't realize that the law enforcement officers that you train in is so, I think it's just fantastic that you actually do both sides of the house.
As do I.
Because law enforcement officers respond to that word, and what you're really saying is that they may be facing the receiving end of a handgun in the way they present that, because officers, we're in a very dangerous period of our society right now. Not that we hadn't gone through some before, and I can't say enough about how important law enforcement officers are and how they control themselves in situations. So that person should basically say, I'm a permittee holder of carrying concealed, which de-escalates the response on the part of law enforcement officers.
I could not agree more. You've trained officers just like I have, JW. People don't understand ordinarily in the general public the reason that we train our officers to put their hand on the trunk of the vehicle. As you know, it's twofold. For your viewers and listeners, it is to make sure that trunk is secure, someone's not hiding in there to hurt us, and the second is, in case we are murdered on the spot, hopefully our handprint there will catch the person who took our lives. If people think in the incident of a traffic stop, for example, the stress level isn't up here for officers, they should think again. If they blurt out, I've got a gun on me, the first thing the officer's gonna hear is gun. What I tell people is this: we've got a real funny thing in my line of work. You show me yours, I show you mine, really quickly. The first thing I encourage them to say is, I am a concealed carry permittee and I have my handgun on me. While they're saying that, palms on the steering wheel, fingertips in the air. If they talk with their hands, stop doing that. Keep the palms on the wheel, fingertips in the air. That lets the officer know I'm not trying to hurt you.
I asked Lieutenant Jeff Gordon was on this show with Sergeant Mike Baker some months ago, and I said if there's one thing, because we were going through some situations at that time that the public didn't know what to do, I said if there's one thing when you stop a vehicle that you want the occupant of that vehicle to know, what is it? And he said one word: hands. And I think you're getting to that same point. The officers that you may encounter, again, if it's not a social situation, are there either to help you or to investigate a situation that you may or may not have been involved in.
Correct.
In your classes to civilians that you're teaching in carrying concealed, how much time do you spend on that in that 8 hours, and how hard do you stress that portion of that class?
I think because of my background, I spend an inordinate amount of time on that, where most citizen instructors probably would not do that because they don't have the background history that I've got. I want folks to understand that this is a good law. You can make mistakes and you can have this concealed carry permit taken away from you. You can make mistakes and have your life taken from you, which we certainly do not want. If they will follow the rules that are set forth by our Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission and by our instructors, they should be okay. I spend a whole lot of time making sure my people understand. You may encounter, it may be a slim margin or a slim chance, but you may encounter an officer who doesn't necessarily agree with the concealed carry referendum. They may not think this is a good law. They might not get treated as respectfully as they would appreciate being treated. The most important thing to remember is this: you do not argue with that officer on the side of the road about that concealed carry handgun. You just don't do it. Whatever they're told to do, they should obey what the officer's orders are. If there's an issue, they can handle that issue later, but not there on the side of the highway. I make sure they understand that the palms stay on the steering wheel, fingertips in the air. They make eye contact to cement the relationship with the officer, and the first thing out of their mouth is, I'm a concealed carry permittee. The next thing is, I have the handgun on me, because as an order of law or a fact of law, if they're not carrying, they're not required to let the officer know that they're a permittee if they aren't carrying. What I tell my students is this: it is still a great idea to let them know it. Because in North Carolina, if I run your name and date of birth, or I run your driver's license by number, I already know you're a concealed carry permittee.
Mm-hmm. You know that before you exit the vehicle.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of get into that a little bit more in depth. A person listening to the show today and they're thinking, you know, I hadn't really thought about it. I might decide I want to get a handgun. Things is getting a little bit dangerous, and it could be somebody driving a tractor out there today. It could be somebody that a suit and tie guy that's going into the office, and he's seen things, or she has seen things, he or she. What's the first thing that they need to know as they are considering that before they show up at a carry and conceal class? Let's start at the very ground level. It just strikes their mind that this might be something I want to do, and it might be something that now I've heard I can do and is legal. What's the first step?
The first step, in my opinion, is talk to people who are actual experts in the field. Please do not assume that if you go to a local or quasi-local gun shop that the person behind that counter is an expert. More than likely, if they have a surplus of a certain type of handgun, they're going to try to push that type of handgun in order to make their get out of the red and get into the black, so to speak. Also, do not assume your neighbor who happens to be part of the gun culture is necessarily an expert. Talk to someone who is actually a concealed carry instructor and does this right. Their first resource should be their local county sheriff's office. Mm-hmm. If they will go to that county sheriff's office and ask for a list of concealed carry instructors, they should give them a list of all people in that county who can teach concealed carry. If the sheriff's office doesn't, because not all 100 sheriffs do that, the person who's in charge of this program for the state of North Carolina is Ed Zapolsky in Raleigh. Mm-hmm. His phone number is 919-661-5980. He's in charge of the program. All they've got to do is call and say, Mr. Zapolsky, I live in Sampson County. Will you give me a list of all Sampson County certified concealed carry instructors? He will send that to them in email, or he will print it off and hard copy mail them.
Now we're really at that point. So at that juncture, then they have the person's name. It could be your name. It could be some other folks' name that teaches this course. Your suggestion then, this is before they even put their hand on the gun, they call you or call somebody else they know in their area that they've got the list of names and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What then do you advise that person? You're on the other end of that call.
I ask them what their primary intent of that handgun is. Do you intend to carry that gun on or about your person every day? Do you intend to keep this gun in your home for home protection? Do you intend to keep it in your truck, what we call euphemistically a truck gun? What is the primary purpose of the handgun? I look at the person's stature, I look at the person's age, I look at their skill level, I look at what the initial and primary intent of the handgun is, and then I make recommendations on what type of handgun they should purchase.
And literally, to take that subject, just kind of go into a direction here with that, there's so many different types of handguns, grip size, weight of handgun,
Absolutely.
Number of rounds in a magazine, how they're loaded, unloaded, all those kinds of things. A lot of folks that are even 60 or above, yours truly here, you've got to think about dexterity capability, functionality capability, those kinds of things. So from that point, can you advise them, or do you have to really, is it good for you to see that person and see what their capabilities are?
I like to meet with the person, but if they can tell me over the telephone that I do have this problem, I'm intimidated by anything that's really complicated to handle, it'll help narrow it down, but I like to meet with the person. Talk to them, find out what kind of person they are, what kind of handgun would suit them the best before I make a final recommendation.
And then from that, they could take that information and go to that gun shop or go to that person that legally sells guns in their area. For example, Midway Ammo and Guns up in Midway here in Sampson County. Grant Jones, one of our sponsors of this show, by the way.
Okay.
Grant's doing a great job. And that is the particular time they would then go to him and say, here's kind of what I'm looking.
That's correct. And I know Grant, and I would say that he would be a good resource also when they're doing their initial research. You can talk to someone like that. Just do not assume because Grant's such a good guy that every person that works at a gun shop is going to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. We're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Chad Thompson. We're talking about carrying concealed. We're talking about your personal safety, and we're talking about life and death situations. We'll be back in a moment.
Whether it's video, voice, internet, or cellular, Star Communications connects you to the things you love. It's what we do and have done for over 50 years. Star Communications, your local technology company.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Kind of halfway the show. I want to thank all of those viewers out there that watch us each and every day. I want to thank you for your comments and commentary. All the folks at the radio station that mentioned this show, Wayne Weeks and the Gospel Hour, the Morning Crew with Nolan Z, Grandpa, and the L-Man. Also Robert Stroud, the Boogie Shoes Radio Network on Saturday afternoon. We appreciate Robert's commentary. Nicole with the Country Store, and also Tommy the Fly. We appreciate you letting folks know what we have, who's coming up on the show, and talking about a subject today, critically important. Chad Thompson. Chad, not only are you an experienced law enforcement officer, instructor, coordinator, tactical instructor, traffic training center, North Carolina Justice Academy, but the piece that struck me too is you got military experience with the United States Coast Guard, District 7, which covers Miami, Florida, law enforcement, narcotics. It goes on, served Desert Shield and Desert Storm. You've seen it from multiple angles in countries that have a very, very small idea of what we call the rule of law, which is critically important. When I'm talking to our district attorney here, Ernie Lee, oftentimes we'll say, you know, folks need to understand more what the rule of law is. In our first half of the show, we talked about that breakdown. We're talking now about your role as a civilian instructor for people that want to carry deadly force to protect their lives. And we're talking about the kind of weapon or the kind of tool, should I say, that they may have to do that. Do you get people that may call you and want to get in your class, again, an 8-hour class, that you look at and go, maybe you shouldn't be? They meet all the qualifications, but you look at them physically and think maybe a handgun is not the best approach for them.
Yeah, it happens occasionally, and I field calls at least once or twice a month from other instructors throughout North Carolina because of what I do for the Academy, who ask me, not to be discriminatory, but one of the instructors called me and asked me, this student that I have, potential student that I have, is completely blind, and they want to obtain their concealed carry handgun permit. I applaud them for wanting to take responsibility for their own protection, but really, a person that is completely blind, is that someone that we want out there with a handgun firing indiscriminately at someone else? And my response to them was, there may be another less lethal force option out there for someone who is completely blind. Not just legally blind, but can't see anything at all. I have had people personally in my class that I was just concerned about their psychological wherewithal, and I have refunded their money and asked them to not obtain a concealed carry handgun permit. I don't know if they went to another instructor or not, but I did not feel comfortable. The trepidation that I felt because of statements they made and their actions let me know that it was not someone I wanted to certify as a concealed carry permittee. And
Chad, as an instructor, that is part of your responsibility as being qualified to teach carrying concealed.
Correct.
Because you can make that determination. The permittee holder goes to the sheriff to get that permit to purchase the gun. But what we've been talking about is before they even get there and they're talking to you. So let's get to that second piece. Before they can actually purchase that weapon, there's that piece of going to the sheriff, which again, whatever county you live in, it's a process.
Yep.
The sheriff can issue that, but there's a background check. Talk to us about that a bit too.
Well, there are two different permits in North Carolina. There's a permit to carry a concealed handgun, and there's a permit to purchase a handgun. They go to their respective sheriff in that county, and that sheriff of their county has a certain rule about how they do things. They pay a fee, whatever the fee may be. I believe it's $5 in most places, and they have to go through a background check. Once they have gotten their background check, they pay their money, they obtain that right to go and purchase a handgun in North Carolina. What some of your listeners may not realize is once they have obtained that concealed carry permit card to carry concealed, they never have to buy another purchase permit. The background check that is done on them so extensively when they obtain concealed carry authority, that takes care of the background check and the purchase permit in the future. All they have to do if they want to buy a gun in the future is either allow them the place they're purchasing from to photocopy the front and back of the permit card, or take a digital photo of the front and back, and they can buy as many handguns as they want on that.
Question that often comes up too, and I want to make sure I touch on this as we're talking about it as well. Somebody mentioned this to me the other day, and there's a statute, as you know, that talks about going about armed in terror of the public. You see people oftentimes with not concealed, but even what I call low-hanging holsters, and sometimes I can't help it. I'm watching, whether you're in a grocery store, wherever you may be. Out of the corner of my eye, I keep watching these people. Okay, why are you? Could I see some creds here? Where's your credentials at or something? But I'm not doing that. But I'm thinking, talk to us about that a bit, because you're seeing more of that now as well.
That's correct. People are becoming more aware of North Carolina's Constitution. Our state Constitution allows what we call common law open carry. In most instances in North Carolina, any law-abiding citizen can carry that firearm displayed in the open in most places. That's not universally, but most of the time they can carry. If any portion of that handgun is exposed, that would let the casual observer know it's a handgun. They're not violating the law most of the time.
And I think that's so critically important, because I'm sure, and hopefully this will help sometimes calls coming into 911, because I'm sure, I haven't checked this, but I'm sure a lot of times they get calls. I just saw a person walk in a grocery store and they had a pistol. Well, that's an interesting observation, and the 911 person is going, okay, was it in a holster? Was it in their hand? What's going on? Because, as you said a while ago, that word handgun or gun just goes to a huge nature of a voice here that there's something happening.
Yes, and I've researched going armed to the terror of the people, which is also a common law in North Carolina, and I've not found any example in our state's history where someone simply carrying the gun in a legal area rose to the level of going armed to the terror. There's always been some other overt act. I have found instances of obvious intoxication. I found one fellow who decided that the best way to celebrate New Year's Eve was to fire his gun in the air. Someone making verbal threats, that kind of thing. The closest I have found, and it has not resulted in a conviction as of yet, but a couple years ago in Fayetteville, a soldier was going to some place like Glamour Shots to get photos with his gear and his M4 rifle, and he walked into the mall with his rifle slung across and his body armor and magazines on, and he was charged, and I think should have been charged, because those people in the mall were absolutely terrified that was going to be an active shooter.
I recall that on the media, and I think some calls I got, I said, well, the guy probably hadn't thought through that very well.
Agreed.
I mean, sometimes you just have to think through things. So let's look at it. Some of the kinds of questions, and I want to make sure I hit on these. The Attorney General, of course, and the Justice Academy falls under the Roy Cooper, the Attorney General, as far as the structural part of the state, and he does a great job with not only with the website but other ways of trying to communicate with the public. And there's a Q&A section that I mentioned to you. And one of those questions starts out, it says, may I carry concealed weapon in North Carolina? Well, it's an open-ended question, and you've answered part of that already. And the question is, the answer to that question, obviously, no, unless you've been through the class. Now, I think where people get mixed up is in that very first introductory question that a lot of folks ask, can I carry concealed? Well, you just can't just take a weapon and you just bought it from Grant Jones or whomever and put it and cover it up and walk around with it.
Not legally in North Carolina, not legally. What they'll have to do if they decide they want to obtain a concealed carry handgun permit is, once again, go to the sheriff of their respective county. They will get a packet, or it depends on the sheriff's office. There are 100 counties in North Carolina, and everyone does it a little differently. Some will say, I'll give you the packet, you fill it out, and then you bring it back and you obtain your class, concealed carry safety class, and bring everything back together. Mm-hmm. Some will not even give citizens the packet until they have obtained the class. Regardless, they'll either get a list of instructors or they'll get the packet. Now, their next step is either fill out the application and then get the class, or flip that coin over. Get the class and then fill out the application.
They could do it either way.
Either way. Even if they don't have a handgun in North Carolina, most of the instructors that I have trained have their own handguns, and they'll allow folks to use their gun for the course to help them make the decision on what kind of handgun they want to buy.
So I think it's important what you just said. They can do it either way, because one of the reasons I think that's important to emphasize is because they may go through the class and discover, I don't really want to purchase a handgun. This is not, quote, for me.
And some do. Some will decide that. Some people who are intimidated by handguns, or they want something a little more simple to operate than a handgun, and they just decide this is not really for me. If they want something strictly for home defense, a lot of people now are going with a long gun of some sort, a rifle or a shotgun.
The age question always comes to mind, and we've got 18 years old, we've got 21 years old for certain consumptions of alcohol, and we've got and it gets confusing to folks. What's the age limit?
To purchase or carry concealed in North Carolina, you must be at least 21 years of age. However, to possess a handgun in North Carolina, you've only got to be 18 years of age. To take the concealed carry handgun class, there is no age limit. Someone can take that concealed carry handgun class just as a safety thing for them and not have any intent of going to obtain their concealed carry permit.
Exactly where I wanted to go next is the safety issue. For folks that you teach in class, and I think one of the things that's always a desperation to me when I hear it is the tragedy of children 5 and 6 years old with handguns. And I know, known you long enough to know that you probably drill that pretty hard in your class.
Absolutely. North Carolina actually has a law in effect. We've had it in effect for a while. 14315.1. The law is called Storage of Firearms to Protect Minors. Not just a handgun, but any firearm. It cannot be left in a home where you have children or reasonably expect children to be, and they access it. If they do, and one of 4 things occurs, all 4 of which are a tragedy, not only is that tragedy going to have to be dealt with, the person who left that gun out of their control will also be criminally charged.
And you're looking at a prosecution issue along with something that you probably would never get beyond in your life.
Agree.
So I just want to stress that so much. The law and the lawful carry of a weapon is a big issue that North Carolina faced. In fact, North Carolina gets a lot of national attention, unfortunately, in some areas I wish it didn't. But this idea of carrying a handgun in a bar, that was one of the big issues, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons the Attorney General wanted to touch on that as a question.
In North Carolina now, it is not specifically exempted as a carry area is any place that sells alcohol to be consumed on the premises. Now, in North Carolina, the person in charge of that property still has the option of posting that property and making it illegal. What people need to understand is this: North Carolina's Constitution does not allow open carry of any firearm on any property that sells alcohol. They can't carry in the open a handgun, a shotgun, or a rifle if they have obtained their concealed carry handgun permit and they're not consuming. Unless it's posted, they may carry there.
We're going to take another quick break and we'll be right back. We'll be back in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
What? How can that be? The way someone broke in and stole my TV. Unless I want to install steel bars, I'll call the experts in security. Star Communications is the one that I can trust to get the job done.
Yeah, the only thing worse than that is not feeling safe in your own home or business.
Call Star Communications now. We're your local security experts, from alarms and monitoring to automation and personal protection.
Word.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We want to start the last portion of this show with a big shout out and thank you for all of those folks out there in the law enforcement community that look after us each and every day of the week, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and oftentimes go to places and do things that are unthinkable to keep us safe each and every day. We give you a big salute and a shout out and a thank you. I've got with me today Chad Thompson with the North Carolina Justice Academy. I'm always so pleased to have anybody, including Mark Strickland on from the Justice Academy, the director, to talk about the Justice Academy and what you guys do. The cadre of instructors over there are bar none, exemplary anywhere in the United States that you want to go. Chad, we're talking about handguns, gun safety, and particularly today I want folks to know that we're focusing on carrying concealed. As we went to break, we were talking about the piece that is so important, and that's the safety issue. How do you secure that gun? How do you make sure it is safe when you come home? Children, and you just expressed your personal feeling about that. Talk to us a bit more about making sure that is in a gun safe or in a safe place that's not accessible to a child.
Not only are you bound by law to do that, you should morally want to do that. I don't think anybody will ever live down if a child got a hold of a gun and a tragedy occurred. The best thing people can do is keep the handgun on their person. around the child. Keep it on their person. If a child puts their hand in your pocket, you will know that. Puts a hand in your purse, if you've got it on you, they'll know that. In your holster, you'll know that. If you don't keep it on your body, get yourself a gun safe. Make sure a child cannot access that firearm. There's nothing more tragic than some minor getting a hold of a gun and hurting themselves or someone else with it. The market is flooded with safety items today, not only to keep kids away, but also thieves away today. One of the big floor safes that you bolt to your house, and also the small safes that you can enter a code in that only you know, or some of them now read your fingerprints and no one can access that. So if you keep it by your bed, if your home is violated, you can access it quickly, but children cannot.
It's so critical that folks understand that safety issue, and part of what you teach in this 8-hour course. Let's go over some of the things that if a person's taken the course, or if they've been through a course, maybe you could touch on some things. If they hadn't had this, they might need to go back through another course again, because everybody, I'm not saying nobody doesn't intentionally not do that. I'm just saying sometimes they maybe don't emphasize some of the key points in that 8 hours that they need to.
Yes, probably one of the most common questions I get from citizens who have taken a class is, what should I have been taught and how long should the class last? That class has to last at least 8 hours in North Carolina, at least, and that doesn't count the qualification at the end. At the end of the
classroom time we're talking.
That's just classroom portion. 2 hours at least must be on North Carolina law. At least 1 hour on safety. The instructor must cover marksmanship fundamentals. They must cover the draw. They must cover presentation of the handgun, types of handguns. They got to go through revolver and semi-automatic. In that 8 hours, to me, it is so paramount that we give our people everything that we can as citizens of North Carolina, and we're all fellow citizens here, to make sure they understand just the gravity of what this journey is they're embarking upon, carrying a handgun on or about the person, and also to keep them out of trouble legally. The class must be at least 8. It doesn't have to be one solid 8-hour class. It can be 2 4-hour classes. It can be 8 1-hour sessions, as long as it's at least 8 hours. The things that have got to be covered, as I said, 2 hours of North Carolina law at least. I would go above and beyond that. Now, the code says at least 1 hour on safety. If my class lasts 10 hours, then it's actually 10 hours on safety, because that's paramount. I tell my people 3 things about safety. It's first, it's central, and it's last. Safety is first, central, and last. To cover the various models of handgun for revolver and semi-automatic, to minimize the amount of confusion people may encounter when they go out and decide that they're going to purchase their own handgun, or when they're carrying their handgun.
Those handguns and the processing doing that, for example, if somebody, knowing that you're on this show now and you are an instructor, you teach not only law enforcement but civilians, how do they get up with you, the 525-415 number, and then your extension is 284?
It is. You can call the Justice Academy at 910-525-4151, and my extension number is 284.
Can they also call you if they just have a question and they think, well, maybe that's something I want to do, but I'm not sure, I need to follow up with a question about what type gun, or maybe they would want to meet with you or something of that nature? Is that something they can do?
Certainly, it's part of my job.
Okay, so I think one of the things that we're doing today is not only enlightening people, but hopefully in this segment we're trying to elongating the information cycle so they know who they can call. Obviously they can go to the NCDOJ website and pull up some information and look at it from there, but there may be something unique. We talked about different types of handguns. We've talked about pistols, actually a handgun itself, but there's other forms of weapons, and you alluded to a while ago, shotguns. Quite frankly, depending on what the situation is, I've had folks to ask the question, is a 410 shotgun with the right shell in it something I need if I'm afraid I can't hit a target well?
For home defense, I would say there's absolutely nothing wrong with a shotgun. 410 gauge or on up to a 12 gauge is outstanding for defending a home. Under North Carolina law, they couldn't carry that concealed. That's correct. Because it's a concealed carry handgun law, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with a shotgun. Instead of one projectile coming from the muzzle of a handgun, using number 8 birdshot in 12 gauge, I've got between 300 and 350 projectiles coming out of the muzzle.
It improves your chances of being safe, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So let's step up and talk about this reciprocity issue. That's an issue that always comes up as well. There's a number of states that if you have a permit here, you're able to carry in states. Talk about how that works, and are we running into any problems with that you see?
Not as of yet. North Carolina fixed this problem for our state a few years ago, and we honor every state's concealed carry permit. If they have a concealed carry permit, a citizen of another state comes to North Carolina, they're allowed to carry concealed here. Not every state reciprocates and allows North Carolina citizens to carry concealed in their state. At last count, there are 32 states in the Union that will allow North Carolina citizens visiting their states to carry a concealed handgun. Their best source of information is the DOJ website, www.ncdoj.gov. On the left-hand side, click on Reciprocity States, and there will be a list of states there.
Absolutely, and one of the things we're going to do at the end of the show, we're going to try to put those at the scroll at the bottom of the show, so folks, when they're looking at this show, they can actually pick up on that. Let's move a little bit to the purposes of carrying concealed, and does it make a difference as to whether you're carrying concealed guns unloaded or loaded? And I know that sounds kind of because, I mean, why would you be carrying if it was unloaded? But a lot of folks will ask that question: do I have to carry my concealed weapon? Do I have to have actually a bullet in it?
In North Carolina, there's no discrimination, no difference. In some states, there is a difference as to whether the handgun was loaded or unloaded. In North Carolina, if the handgun is on or about the person, there is absolutely no difference between it being unloaded or loaded.
While we're on it, I want to back up to one thing too, back to the bar situation. I want to make sure we cover that very well. The bar situation is one that often comes up. Talk to the piece about it if you're in a bar and you're carrying concealed. Folks will say, well, I'm the DD, so designated driver, so I'm carrying concealed. How important is it for you to understand that that's a critical component?
Oh, in North Carolina, as I said, our state law still says this: firearms in general are illegal at any establishment that serves alcohol. Now, the caveat under that says this: concealed carry permittees may possess a concealed carry handgun on or about the person unless the place is posted and unless they're consuming alcohol. If there's no sign prohibiting it and the citizen isn't consuming alcohol, they may carry a concealed handgun in there only. As soon as that citizen consumes any amount of intoxicating beverage or illegal drug or the illicit use of prescription medication, they have now rescinded their right to carry concealed, as long as that remains in the bloodstream.
Absolutely, because everything then is forfeited. All of their rights
correct.
As it relates to carrying concealed becomes a issue of not only determination but mental judgment. Talk a bit about what you talk to your students about when it comes the time and the activity to use deadly force is upon them. And of course, we do this with law enforcement officers. We've done it for years. We call it the will to actually use deadly force. Does that same formula to the civilian community apply? And the reason I bring that up, oftentimes, if you're not going to use deadly force, and it's time that you have to use deadly force, it can also be used against you.
And it probably will be.
Yeah.
If people know in their heart of hearts that they do not have what it takes to take another person's life if it comes down to it, all they have done is introduced a deadly weapon into the mix when they know they can be disarmed and it can be used against them. Most people who are part of the criminal element today did not wake up in their mid-20s or mid-30s and say, I think I'll start breaking the law today. That's right. They were formed at a young age. If they would apply themselves, they could have a PhD in human psychology. These criminals know who to attack, who to prey upon. If they have that sixth sense of the smell of fear, this person will not use that firearm. What they will usually do is disarm that person and use it against them.
Absolutely, and I think that was so critical to let folks know. And I'm saying that in that my sense is if you go through your class and you're about to spend the time and you're about to spend the money to purchase a gun, make that decision early on. Are you willing to do that given the dynamic of the situation?
We'll see it. We'll see it indeed.
Can we say about limits or numbers of weapons? Talk about that. I often get that question. Well, I'm not sure if I like a revolver, or if I like a semi-automatic, or I'm not sure if I like a Glock or S&W or whatever. Well, what if a person's pretty well off and they can buy 3 or 4? Can they buy that, or can they buy 40? How many?
There are 2 times in your life, and this is what I tell my students, that you can have too many guns or too much ammo. If you're swimming or on fire. Other than that, you cannot have too many handguns or too much ammo. You buy as many as you're comfortable with, and you carry as many handguns at one time once you get your concealed carry handgun permit as you're comfortable carrying at one time.
Well, I think one of the things I've hoped that we have done is give folks a good kind of segue in to reaching out to Chad Thompson. Also, I hope we have given the number 525-4151. 284 is the extension. It goes straight to your phone. And trust me, I can personally say they might not get you on the other end because you may be in some other part of the state or country teaching. But Chad, I want to thank you for taking time. We've touched on a small number of issues that could be talked about in this very intense cycle of carrying concealed. And I appreciate your professionalism and what you do for the Justice Academy in the state of North Carolina.
Certainly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate you joining us each and every week, and we look forward to seeing you again next week on the radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.